I can hire 3 fresh college grads for what you cost. He smirked across the conference table. Nothing personal, just numbers. That was the moment Thomas Barrett, a 55-year-old systems architect, knew his 18th-year tenure at Crestline Housing was over. For nearly 2 decades, he'd been the quiet force behind every bit of their technology. Building custom infrastructure, scaling the system across multiple states, and ensuring seamless operations most folks in the executive suite barely understood. The man firing him, Alan Drummond, was Crestline's newly minted CTO, a 42-year-old with a Cornell MBA and a fondness for buzzwords like modernization and agility. Alan had been with the company barely 6 months, but he'd already made up his mind the future meant cutting costs, and Thomas's seasoned expertise came with a salary he deemed too expensive. Diane, from HR, slid a severance package across the table with a tight smile. 2 months, pay plus your vacation days, she said, as if that would somehow cushion the blow of being discarded. Thomas simply nodded, collected the folder, and walked out. Without protest, without anger. But inside, he wasn't calm. He was just done. Done explaining the value of things executives refused to understand. Done pretending loyalty still meant something. He didn't slam any doors. He didn't need to. Some lessons, he thought, are only learned the hard way. And they were about to learn one. Thomas Barrett had joined Crestline Housing back when the company was still a modest local firm called Harborview Properties. At the time, they managed just 4 apartment complexes, ran 2 desktop computers on dial-up internet, and used a fax machine that jammed more often than it worked. The original owner, Robert Langford, had hired Thomas away from a consulting gig in Syracuse. "We're expanding," Robert had said, shaking his hand. "I need someone who can build this thing solid," and build it he did. Over the next 18 years, Thomas transformed that humble setup into a full-scale, integrated property management system that supported 63 properties across 4 states. He wrote custom code, introduced automation for rent collection and maintenance scheduling, developed tenant background screening tools, and designed the architecture to adapt as the company grew. Piece by piece, line by line, he made Harborview, and eventually, Crestline, a digital force in property management. But things changed when Robert retired and sold the company to a private equity firm. They rebranded it as Crestline Housing and brought in new leadership who cared more about quarterly earnings than operational stability. When Thomas requested a small team to help document the massive custom system he had built so it could be properly maintained or scaled, they said it was too expensive. Every quarter they promised to revisit it. That quarter never came. Then came the consultants, slick MBAs with jargon and no clue. They suggested replacing Thomas's unique architecture with off-the-shelf solutions that wouldn't even fit their existing infrastructure. He tried to explain, but they weren't listening. Eventually, they stopped inviting him to meetings altogether. At home, Thomas's wife, Linda, saw it coming before he did. One evening, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, she said, "They're pushing you out, Tom?" Quietly, but definitely. "You need to start thinking about your next move." He had laughed it off at the time. "They can't get rid of me. No one else knows how this thing runs." Her silence said more than words. 6 months later, they hired Alan Drummond as the new CTO. Alan came from a banking software company and brought 3 junior engineers with him. Fresh out of college, all eager but green. Thomas was asked to let them shadow him and share his knowledge. He did his best, but it was like teaching calculus to people still learning to add and subtract. They didn't understand the system's logic, let alone the layers of redundancy and security he had built in over the years. Then came the surprise termination meeting. No warning, just a casual, quarterly check in turned pink slip. Alan cited cost, cutting, and future scalability, explaining how 3 junior salaries were more efficient than 1 veteran engineer. But what he really didn't understand, what none of the board did, was that Thomas wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was the one who built the entire machine from scratch. As Thomas packed up 18 years of work into 1 cardboard box, he felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. They'd made their decision. Now they would have to live with it. Back home, watching the sunset over Lake Erie, bourbon in hand, he said quietly to Linda. They have no idea what's coming. She didn't ask what he meant. She just nodded. They both knew. Just 3 days after Thomas Barrett cleared out his office at Crestline Housing, the phone calls began. The first was a voicemail from the new CTO, Alan Drummond. He sounded calm, too calm, as he explained they were having minor issues with the tenant portal and hoped Thomas could lend a hand for a quick consultation. Thomas let it go to voicemail. By evening, the tone of the messages had changed. There were now several calls, each one more urgent than the last. The system was down. Maintenance requests weren't processing. Automated payments had failed, and tenants were calling in with complaints. Thomas sat on his back deck, the evening sun glinting off Lake Erie, sipping coffee while his phone buzzed in vain. He wasn't angry. He was finished. That night, Linda brought him a second cup and asked, "Are you going to call them back?" "No," he said plainly. "Let them figure it out." What Alan didn't realize was that Thomas had spent years asking for resources to properly document the system. Every request had been ignored, so when he left, the knowledge left with him. He hadn't sabotaged anything. He had just stopped being ignored. By the fourth day, a new email landed in his inbox, not from Crestline, but from a rising competitor, Redwood Systems. Their director of technology, Margaret Ellis, had followed his work and wanted to meet. "We're building our own property management system," her email said, "and we want to do it right this time." Over coffee at a small diner in Rochester, Margaret laid out her vision, a platform that was scalable, secure, and, most importantly, sustainable. She offered him the role of chief systems architect with full autonomy, a better salary, and a promise. Why invest in people who build things to last? 2 days later, Thomas signed the contract. As he began assembling his new team, he reached out to a few trusted former colleagues from Crestline. People like Don, a senior network engineer who'd resigned after watching how Thomas was treated. They came on board eagerly. At Redwood, documentation was required from day one. Redundancy wasn't a luxury, it was a design principle. Everyone knew their role. Everyone shared knowledge. Meanwhile, Crestline was unraveling. The consultants they brought in couldn't make sense of Thomas's architecture. Tenant data was misplaced, logins failed, and rent payments glitched. Staff morale plummeted. The board panicked. By the end of the second week, Crestline's largest client, Brookstone Residential, issued a formal complaint and threatened to terminate their contract. Brookstone managed over 10,000 units and contributed nearly a third of Crestline's annual revenue. Then came the most unexpected moment. Alan Drummond showed up at Thomas's front door. His tie was loose, his voice shaky. "Thomas, the entire platform is failing. We need your help. The board has approved $500 an hour, whatever it takes. Please." Thomas didn't raise his voice. He simply looked him in the eye and said, "I have a new job now. They value experience." He shut the door, not with bitterness, but with peace. The next morning, Redwood's Margaret Ellis forwarded Thomas an email. It was from Brookstone Residential. They were looking for a new system provider, and they wanted Redwood. Thomas didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He opened his notebook, jotted a few infrastructure notes, and said to Margaret, "Let's be ready." 2 weeks after Thomas Barrett started his new role at Redwood Systems, the calls from Crestline Housing hadn't stopped. Systems were still failing. Payment records were incomplete, tenants were being overcharged, and the consulting firm they had hired was struggling to make sense of the legacy code Thomas had written. Then came a text from Don, his former colleague and now Redwood teammate. "They've lost years of tenant data. Backups corrupted. It's a mess." That evening, over dinner, Thomas recounted the story to his wife, Linda. "I knew it would be bad," he said, stirring his soup, "but this bad? They didn't just ignore documentation. They made sure it never existed." Just a few days later, Thomas had an unexpected visitor, Don himself, standing in the doorway of his new office at Redwood with a laptop bag and a serious look. "Got time for lunch?" he asked. "At the deli down the street." Don laid it all out. "The whole IT department's falling apart. People are quitting. The consultants told leadership they might have to rebuild the entire system from scratch." Thomas raised an eyebrow. Not surprised? That's not all, Don continued. I found something while trying to help them understand the old payment gateway. Emails from Alan Drummond and the board months before they fired you. They planned it. He pulled out his laptop and showed Thomas message after message, conversations outlining a strategy to eliminate high-cost legacy staff, specifically naming Thomas. The plan included replacing him with cheaper engineers and shifting to off-the-shelf software within 6 months. Why are you showing me this? Thomas asked quietly. Don looked him square in the eye. Because I resigned this morning, and I'm not the only one. The firm is on fire, and Brookstone, Crestline's biggest client, is getting ready to jump ship. Brookstone Residential, Thomas knew, made up nearly a third of Crestline's revenue. If they pulled out, it wouldn't just be a crisis, it could tank the entire company. Also, Don hesitated. I was hoping Redwood might need another database administrator. Thomas grinned. I think that can be arranged. Later that evening, Thomas received yet another call from Alan Drummond. This time, his voice was no longer composed. Thomas, please. Westbrook, Brookstone, is threatening to cancel their contract. The board is looking into my decisions. They're asking for you. Thomas sighed. Alan, I'm employed now. Exclusively. I've made commitments. We'll double your rate. Just 2 days. That's all we're asking. It's not about money. Alan's voice cracked. Then what is it? Revenge? No, Thomas said calmly. It's about respect, for the work, for the experience, for the people who keep things running when no one else understands how. There was silence on the line. You knew this would happen, Alan finally said. You knew exactly what would break and when. Thomas replied, I just knew what I'd built and what it took to maintain. I tried to share that. Repeatedly. He ended the call with a clear mind. He hadn't wished this failure upon them. But sometimes, people don't believe in your value until they're forced to live without it. At Redwood, Thomas returned to his new blueprint, building something better from the ground up. Fully documented, fully supported. And this time, done the right way. 3 months into his new role at Redwood Systems, Thomas Barrett was already seeing the fruits of his labor. The platform his team was building was stable, modular, and above all, documented. But then came the email that would change everything. It was from Lawrence, Redwood's CTO. Just got off a call with Brookstone Properties. They're officially leaving Crestline Housing next month. They want to know if we can handle their portfolio. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Brookstone managed over 10 Zalazan residential units across the Northeast. Taking on their operations would more than double Redwood's current scale. We're not ready, Thomas admitted when he met with Lawrence. Not fully. What would it take? Lawrence asked. Thomas outlined the essentials: 3 more senior engineers, dedicated infrastructure, and at least 8 weeks of development time. It's tight, but if we phase the rollout, we can manage. Brookstone, as it turned out, was desperate. Crestline's constant system outages had eroded tenant trust. They were willing to fund the infrastructure and give Redwood 12 weeks to deliver. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He stayed at the kitchen table, sketching diagrams, mapping data migration flows, identifying failover strategies. Linda, his wife, brought him tea at 2 a.m. Big moment, she asked. He nodded without looking up. It's not just about the system anymore. It's about proving we can lead. The next day, Thomas presented his phased rollout strategy. Lawrence reviewed it carefully. Looks solid, he said, but then raised an eyebrow. You've added 3 weeks for documentation? It's non-negotiable, Thomas replied. That's where Crestline failed. We document from day one. Train everyone. No black boxes, no single points of failure. Lawrence gave a slow, understanding nod. Then let's do it right. The next several weeks were intense. They expanded the team, bringing in engineers, including 2 former Crestline veterans who'd had enough of corporate chaos. Don, Thomas's former database administrator, was now building custom migration tools to safely transfer Brookstone's data. Midway through the project, Thomas received an unexpected email from Justin Harrow, the son of Crestline's original founder and now a board advisor. Thomas, I owe you an apology. We were missiled about your value and the risks of replacing you. Graham Drummond has been removed as CTO. If you're willing, we'd love to talk about bringing you back. Thomas didn't reply. They were 10 weeks into the 12-week timeline when Lawrence asked Thomas to meet in his office. Waiting inside was a familiar face. Jeffrey Brookstone, CEO of Brookstone Properties. I hear you're the one making this all happen, Jeffrey said, shaking Thomas's hand. I'm doing my best. Well, we're impressed. I also hear you used to work for Crestline. I did. They're in real trouble. Their system's still a mess. No buyers interested in touching them now, except maybe one. Thomas tilted his head. Ooh? Lawrence spoke up. We're considering acquiring Crestline for a fraction of their last valuation. If we do, we want you to lead the integration, if you're comfortable with that. Thomas paused, absorbing the weight of that irony. The very system he'd built, the company that discarded him, now possibly coming under his leadership. I'll do it, he said. On one condition, we do it right. Full documentation. No shortcuts. And no cutting corners just to make numbers look good. Jeffrey smiled. That's exactly why we want you. As he left the room, Thomas didn't feel triumphant. He felt grounded. After years of being undervalued, he was finally in a position not just to build systems, but to build a better culture. Weeks into Redwood Systems' largest rollout yet, Thomas Barrett barely had a moment to breathe. His team was working around the clock to prepare the infrastructure for Brookstone Properties, whose 10,000-unit portfolio was about to shift from Crestline Housing's collapsing system to Redwood's new platform. But amid the controlled chaos, a familiar name appeared in his inbox. Justin Harrow, the son of Crestline's original founder. Thomas, I want to personally apologize for how things ended. We were missiled about the impact of letting you go. Graham Drummond is no longer with the company. If you're open to it, we'd welcome a conversation about your return. Thomas didn't respond. He was too focused on what really mattered. Building something that lasted. Something Crestline never gave him the resources or support to do. At Redwood, he had that freedom, and the difference showed. A few days later, with only 2 weeks to go before launch, Thomas was in a planning meeting when Lawrence, Redwood's CTO, asked him to step outside. There's someone I want you to meet, he said. Standing in the hallway was Jeffrey Brookstone, CEO of Brookstone Properties. I've heard a lot about you, Jeffrey said, offering a firm handshake. Lawrence tells me you've built a system that can actually scale with no smoke and mirrors. That's the goal, Thomas said humbly. Jeffrey got to the point. Crestline's been trying to sell. But with their reputation in tatters, no one's biting. Except one potential buyer, Redwood. Thomas raised an eyebrow. If the deal goes through, Jeffrey continued, we want someone who understands both companies. Someone who can salvage what's worth saving and make sure we never face this kind of failure again. Lawrence looked to Thomas. We want you to lead the integration, if you're willing. Thomas took a moment. This was the company that tossed him aside to save a few dollars. Now they were sinking. The irony wasn't lost on him. But he didn't feel bitterness. Just resolve. I'll do it, he said finally. But we do it right. Full documentation. Proper training. We bring people along. We don't push them out. Jeffrey smiled. That's exactly why you're the right man for the job. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Redwood finalized the acquisition of Crestline for a fraction of its former value. Overnight, Thomas went from being fired to overseeing the integration of the company that had once written him off. He returned to the office building he'd helped design systems for 2 decades earlier. The sign now read Redwood Integrated Property Management. Some former colleagues looked away awkwardly. Others nodded with quiet relief. Graham Drummond was gone, along with much of the executive team that approved Thomas's dismissal. Justin stayed on as a transitional advisor. During the first company-wide meeting, Lawrence introduced Thomas. Many of you know Thomas Barrett, he said. He built the original systems that ran this company for nearly 20 years. Now he'll lead the integration of both companies into something better than either had before. Thomas didn't gloat. He didn't say, I told you so. He simply outlined the roadmap, the support available, and, most importantly, that no one would lose their job just to make a spreadsheet look good. After the meeting, Lawrence pulled him aside. "You've changed the culture around here," he said. "You've shown everyone what respect for experience and quality really looks like." Thomas nodded. "It was never about revenge. I just wanted the work to matter." And now, it did. It had been exactly 1 year since Thomas Barrett stood in front of the same conference room that had once belonged to his old company. But now, the sign on the wall read Redwood Integrated Property Management. The acquisition had gone through for less than a quarter of Crestline Housing's valuation before Thomas was forced out. The irony was not lost on him. The integration had been intense. Crestline's bloated, undocumented systems had been systematically decommissioned and replaced with the modular platform Thomas had architected from scratch at Redwood. Everything was documented. Every team member was trained. Every core function had fail-safes. There were no more single points of failure, no more guesswork, and definitely no more pinching decisions that put infrastructure at risk. Today's meeting marked the final phase of the transition. Lawrence, Redwood's CTO, addressed the staff gathered in the room. "Many of you already know Thomas Barrett," Lawrence said with a calm smile. "He built the foundation that held Crestline together for nearly 2 decades. And now he's built something even better, something that will carry us into the future." Thomas stood up to speak, this time not as a man fighting to prove his worth, but as someone who had already done it. "When I was let go from Crestline," he said, "I packed up 18 years of work into a single cardboard box. At the time, I thought that was the end of the road. But in truth, it was a new beginning. What you see here now, the systems, the culture, the collaboration. This is what happens when people are allowed to build things the right way." There were nods around the room. Some of the staff from Crestline looked visibly relieved to be part of a company that valued quality over quick fixes. Others, those who had joined Redwood from day one, seemed proud to see their hard work come full circle. After the meeting, Lawrence pulled Thomas aside with a document in hand. "The board approved your proposal," he said. "The Technical Education Division launches next quarter. You'll lead it, curriculum, hiring, the whole thing." Thomas smiled. "You're sure?" Lawrence grinned. "This was your idea, remember? Training the next generation of engineers who build systems that last. Not just flashy code, but infrastructure that holds." Later that day, Thomas boxed up his things from the integration office, not out of urgency, but with purpose. This wasn't a termination. This was a transition into a role that finally matched both his skills and values. Just as he closed his laptop, there was a knock on the door. It was Justin Harrow, son of Crestline's founder. "My father's retired now," Justin said as they walked to the courtyard. "He keeps up with company news. Said he was glad to hear you were back. In a manner of speaking, he put it." "How is Harold?" Thomas asked. "Fishing a lot." "Peaceful." Justin paused, then added, "He always said letting you go would be the biggest mistake the company could make." Looks like he was right. Thomas nodded, thoughtful. "It took losing what I built for others to realize the value. But now, we've created something that'll last far longer, and that's what matters." As Thomas drove home along the lakefront that evening, golden leaves falling in his rearview mirror, he reflected on the past year, not with bitterness, but with quiet pride. He hadn't sought revenge. He hadn't needed to. He simply moved forward, built better, and let the results speak for themselves. Sometimes the best way to prove your worth is to never look back. Thomas Barrett leaned back in his office chair at Redwood Systems, the final piece of a complex database migration tool running smoothly on his screen. Across from him, Alan Pierce, his former colleague at Crestline Housing and now his trusted lead database administrator, grinned as he watched rows of data translate and validate flawlessly. "Never thought I'd see the day," Alan said, stretching his arms. Thomas smiled. "Neither did I. Their journey hadn't been easy." Just months before, Crestline, the company that had discarded Thomas after 18 years of service, was spiraling into chaos. Their systems were crashing, tenant data was corrupted, and clients were pulling out. The turning point had come when Redwood, a smaller but ambitious competitor, brought Thomas in to architect something new, something durable. Now, they were weeks into integrating Westbrook Properties, a major client Crestline had lost due to their system failures. Redwood's new platform, designed by Thomas, was handling the transition in stages. And today, the final dataset, rent records, maintenance logs, communications, had been fully migrated. But that wasn't the only surprise of the week. Earlier, Thomas had received an email from Justin Harrow, the son of Crestline's founder. It was terse but sincere. "I want to apologize. We made a mistake. Graham Drummond is gone. If you ever consider coming back, the door is open." Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. His team had not only built a superior system, they were building a new standard for the entire industry. That afternoon, Thomas and Alan met with Lawrence Devlin, Redwood's CTO. "Gentlemen," Lawrence said, sliding a brochure across the table, "Westbrook is officially on board. Their CEO, Jeffrey, sent this as a thank you. Said he's never seen a rollout go this smoothly." The brochure featured a full-page photo taken during a tenant appreciation event, hosted by Westbrook and powered by Redwood's platform. Thomas chuckled. "I guess it works." Lawrence leaned forward. "It more than works. We're becoming the benchmark." He paused before continuing. "There's more. We've received interest from other major property groups who saw what happened with Crestline. They want in. They want Redwood." Alan looked at Thomas. "This is getting big." Thomas nodded slowly. He remembered when he sat alone, freshly let go, watching the sun set over Lake Ontario. He had no plans, just a belief that good work mattered and would be noticed someday. That someday had arrived. But the moment that sealed it all came at the end of the day. A letter had arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a hand-written note. "Thomas, thank you for standing your ground. You showed us what leadership really means. My father would have been proud. Justin." Thomas folded the letter carefully and placed it in his drawer. Not for ego, not for validation, but because it reminded him that resilience isn't loud. It's consistent. It's quiet. It's doing the right thing when no one's watching and letting the results tell the story later. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting golden reflections on the glass exterior of Redwood's offices, Thomas packed up his briefcase and turned off the lights. Another day of meaningful work behind him. A legacy being built, this time on his terms. After nearly 2 decades of loyal service, Edward Langston walked out of Crestline Housing with nothing but a cardboard box and a quiet nod. He had led their systems engineering team since the early days, built the entire infrastructure from the ground up. But to the new XX, his experience had become too expensive, so they replaced him with 3 junior engineers. 2 weeks later, the same people who cut him loose were calling in a panic. The tenant portal had crashed, payment systems were failing, and no one could untangle the architecture Ed had once offered to document. Back when they told him it wasn't a priority. Ed didn't answer the first few calls. But what broke the silence wasn't their desperation. It was an opportunity. Redwood Realty, a smaller company with big vision, offered him a fresh start. Full autonomy, respect, and a mission build something that lasts. While Crestline scrambled, Redwood thrived. And when Crestline's biggest client jumped ship to Redwood, Ed didn't gloat. He just got back to work, head down, doing what he did best. Life has a way of revealing the truth in silence. When you're dismissed, disrespected, or overlooked, don't waste energy on revenge. Let your work speak for you. Integrity, patience, and consistency will always outshine short-term thinking. The greatest dignity is found not in getting even, but in moving forward with purpose. Have you ever felt undervalued or pushed aside? Share your experience in the comments. We read every story. If this message touched you, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another story about strength, wisdom, and quiet victory. Because sometimes the best revenge is living well.